My brother left me a Tesla, a 2-story house, and 500,000 acres of land. I never imagined that kind of wealth would fall into my lap at 72 years old. I thought the will reading would be quiet, almost lonely. My brother had no wife, no children, and in his final years, I was the only one who sat by his side. So when the lawyer slid those papers toward me, I felt a mix of grief and gratitude. It wasn't about the car or the land. It was about being trusted with his life's work. But just as I was beginning to process what that meant for me, he walked in. My son, the one I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. The last time we'd exchanged words, he told me I was a burden, that he was done with me. Now here he was, standing in the doorway of the lawyer's office, as if summoned by the scent of money. "Mom," he said, his voice warm in a way I hadn't heard in years. Too warm. "I came as soon as I heard about Uncle David. I want to help you." "Help me?" I stared at him, at the expensive watch peeking from under his sleeve, the phone in his hand that never stopped buzzing. He had ignored every holiday, every birthday, every hospital stay. Now he wanted to help. The lawyer, Ms. Patel, cleared her throat, uncomfortable. My son didn't glance at her. He leaned closer, lowering his voice like we were partners in some secret. "That's a lot of land for you to handle, Mom. A woman your age shouldn't have that kind of stress. Why don't you let me manage it for you?" How could my own son, the boy I carried and raised, look at me not as a mother, but as an opportunity? He thought the years of silence had made me weak, that age had made me naive, that he could swoop in with a smile and a promise and take everything my brother entrusted to me. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment my whole life, and before this story was over, he would learn exactly what kind of mother I am. But to understand how it all happened, I have to go back to the beginning. I drove the Tesla the day after the will reading. It was silent, the way late snow is silent, a glide more than a drive. I took the road out of town past the feed store and the Baptist church and onto the long ribbon of highway that cut through brush country toward the house David left me. The 2-story stood alone on a low rise, weathered cedar and corrugated metal roof. A porch wrapped around it like an embrace. Beyond it, the world fell into distances most people only see from airplane windows. Mesas bruised purple by cloud shadows, arroyos like deep scars, and far off the stutter of wind turbines that David never admitted he liked. 500,000 acres. That's what the will said. It wasn't a single fence line you could step over. It was a patchwork of deeded parcels, grazing allotments, mineral rights grandfathered in before we were born, and leases with the Bureau of Land Management that let you move cattle where the rain decided to fall. Acres under management, David called them. Practical, unsentimental. He'd consolidated over decades, paying debts for neighbors after dry years, swapping sections until the map looked like a quilt stitched by a stern ant. Tomas was waiting on the porch when I pulled up, hat in his hand. He'd worked for David 30 years, and for our father before that when the place was just 200 acres and a stubborn dream. "Senora Whitman," he said, and I made him call me Eleanor like always. "Don't get formal with me, Tomas," I said, taking his rough hand. "Not today." He looked at the car and chuckled. "Your brother loved his trucks. He never trusted anything that didn't rattle." Then he sobered. "I'm sorry for your loss." "I'm sorry for ours," I said, and felt my throat tighten. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and coffee. Ms. Patel had arranged to have the important papers brought here. A banker's box with David's handwriting on the lid. Deeds, tax, water. He was orderly to the end. I didn't have more than a minute before tires crunched on gravel again. My son stepped out of a rented SUV, sunglasses, white smile, a bouquet of grocery roses in hand. The last time I had seen him, he was 40, angry, and thin with resentments. Now he was 49, successful, or at least rehearsed at it. He took off his sunglasses like a man stepping onto a stage. "Mom." "Eric," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It didn't soften. Names have a weight when they've gone unused long enough. He handed me the roses as if they were proof of relationship. "You look good." "I look like I buried my brother last week," I said. He ignored the correction and turned to take in the house. "This is something," he said. "And the land. I had no idea Uncle David had this much." "That's because you never asked." He kept smiling as if my words couldn't find purchase. "I called a friend who knows a bit about ranch operations. There are management firms that specialize in this scale. Water rights, leases, carbon credits, wind. There's a lot of value here. If we move quickly, we can lock in an option that—" "We?" I said. He blinked. "You, of course," he said quickly. "You and the family." "The family?" I asked. "You mean the family who stopped returning my calls after your father died? The family who left me to move boxes alone?" He exhaled through his nose, patient. "Mom, I don't want to argue. I know we've had time apart. I'm trying to make amends. Let me do something for you." "Amends," I said. "What is it you're apologizing for?" His jaw tightened a fraction. He wasn't used to being asked for specifics. "For not being there," he said finally. "For saying things I didn't mean." "You meant them," I said gently. "That's all right, meaning it is what makes the apology honest." He looked toward the horizon, calculating the distance to the nearest cell tower. "Can we sit? Go over your options?" "Later," I said. "Let me show you the land you want to manage first." We drove in the Tesla to the north pastures where the fences cut long silver lines through grass brittle as old paper. Pronghorn lifted their heads to watch us, ear tags flashing bright, then settled back like gossipers who'd lost interest. At a windmill, we stopped, and I walked him to the tank where the water came up cold and iron-scented. "This windmill was the first thing our father ever bought on credit," I said. "He paid it off penny by penny, fixing fence for a rancher south of here. David rebuilt the head twice with parts he pulled from a junkyard in Uvalde. We don't sell things here because they're old. We keep what works." Eric nodded, bored. "And you think this sermon means the new economy won't show up?" he said, trying a chuckle. "Mom, this land is a cash machine if you let it be. I've got developers calling me back to back. They're hungry to put a wind farm that will pay you 8 figures just for the easement. There's a carbon credit fund that—" "Developers are always hungry," I said. "They will chew off their own tongues if you hold a mirror up to them. That doesn't mean I open my mouth." He swallowed his impatience. "At least, let me bring in a team to evaluate everything." "It's irresponsible not to." "Responsible to who?" I asked. "To the grass that doesn't grow back if you cut it too close? To the water that doesn't refill a tank if you sell it downriver?" He rubbed his temple, a gesture of long practice. "To your future, to mine. This is my inheritance too, whether it's on paper yet or not." There it was. Finally, something true. That evening, when he had gone back to his motel, I brewed coffee and opened the banker's box. The deeds were old and crackling at the edges, transferred and consolidated, some with our father's shaky rectangle of a signature and others with David's steady one. Water rights were concise, a miracle in their way, recorded in the county real property book with dates stacked like river stones. There was a folder labeled Agreements, Community. Inside were copies of grazing terms with 2 neighboring families and a memorandum of understanding with a tribal council 2 counties west for wintering cattle when snowfall made water scarce. In David's handwriting at the bottom of the memorandum, reciprocity, remember. There was also a sealed envelope with my name. I turned it over in my hands, then opened it. 2 pages in David's plain block letters. L. If you're reading this, then the good Lord finally called my number. I didn't leave you this because you are my only sister. I left it because you're the one person I trust to keep it whole. You will be tempted to sell pieces. Don't. I built this so we'd never have to be hungry again. Not for food, not for power. The land is ours if we act like we belong to it, not the other way around. There's a second box at the First County Bank, safety deposit. Ask for Ms. Alvarez. Use the key in the blue coffee can in the pantry, same can I told you never to touch. I know who Eric is. I know he'll come. Forgive him if you can. Protect yourself if you can't. Love, D. I sat at the kitchen table and cried in that dry way that feels like sand more than water. I had always loved my son. When he was little, he slept with one hand gripping my hair so I couldn't leave him. When he was 16, he told me I didn't understand the world. When he was 35, he told me I was an anchor he had to cut loose to sail. Morning brought plain decisions. I went to First County Bank when it opened and asked for Ms. Alvarez. She was older than me by a decade, stout, silver hair pinned in a bun so neat it might have been lacquered. David was a good man, she said. He did business by a handshake and then drew up the papers after. I respected that. In the vault, I used the key from the blue coffee can. Inside the box were 3 things: a thick stack of original mineral deeds wrapped in oilcloth, a compact black thumb drive labeled Ledger, and an operating agreement for something called Whitmore Range and Water, LLC, signed by David and left for me to sign. A sticky note in his hand on the first page. Sign this last. See Ms. Patel first. I called Ms. Patel from the parking lot. He always did like to set me homework, she said, and her voice softened in a way that made me trust her more. Come by this afternoon. On my way back to the house, I stopped at Bautista's, the feed store. June Bautista has known me since we both wore our hair in braids and believed in boys with guitars. She took in the sight of me, my tight mouth, the box in my arms, and nodded like she could see the rest. Coffee? She asked. There's always a pot. We stood by the register while a ranch hand weighed sacks of cubes in the back. He's here, I said. Your boy? She asked. I nodded. Says he wants to help? She clicked her tongue. Sometimes help comes in an empty bowl, she said. Sometimes it comes with a fork. At Ms. Patel's office, we spread the contents of the safety deposit box across her desk. The operating agreement puts the deeded land and the mineral rights into an LLC, she said, scanning. The grazing allotments and BLM leases would remain with you personally because they depend on the operator. But the LLC operating agreement does something unusual. She tapped the clause with her pen. A stewardship board with 3 members, owner, community representative, and ecological advisor. Any sale of land or transfer over 1% requires unanimous approval. David never did anything halfway, I said. This is careful, Ms. Patel said, and frankly, brilliant. It protects the operation from predatory buyers. Your son couldn't sell a fence post without 2 other people agreeing. Who are the other 2? I asked. The document names Tomas as community representative, she said, and for ecological advisor, there's a line left blank with instructions. To be designated by Eleanor upon advice of tribal partner or university extension. She looked up. David trusted your judgment. Trust is a heavier gift than money. It asks you to lift it every day. That evening, Eric arrived again with a man he introduced as a consultant. The man wore boots that had a costume quality to them and a belt buckle big enough to reflect the room. Name's Clay, he said, pumping my hand. I help families unlock value they didn't know they had. I know what I have, I said. I'm deciding what it has in me. Clay laughed as if I'd made a joke. We're talking real numbers, he said. We can structure a sale leaseback of the core pasture land, retain mineral rights, and monetize water rights downriver. You'll never have to worry about a thing." "I wasn't worried," I said. Eric's smile tightened. "Mom, at least listen." "I am listening," I said. "I'm listening to the part where the word monetize means take once and the word retain means not for long." Clay lifted his hands as if in surrender. "Tell you what," he said, "we'll leave a proposal. No pressure." "Leave it with Ms. Patel," I said. "If she tells me it's worth my time, I'll read it." When they were gone, I sat with the impulse to call Eric back and say something that might soften what had hardened between us. But then I remembered the last time I'd called him after his father's funeral. I had asked him if he could come help me move the heavy wardrobe that held our blankets. He'd said he was busy grieving in a way I wasn't, busy with a life where I did not live. The next week was a series of tests. Eric began arriving unannounced, bringing groceries I didn't ask for, changing light bulbs that hadn't burned out. He found reasons to open drawers, to ask where I kept my checkbook. He suggested gently that I should see a doctor to check my memory, just to be safe. He took a photograph of my pillbox on the kitchen counter and said we should get me organized. He never said the word guardianship. He never had to. I called Ms. Patel. "He's building a case," she said. "They call it a capacity narrative. He will bring you tea and then tell a judge you forgot to drink it." "I drink my tea," I said. "I know," she said, "but he's not documenting the cups you finish, only the ones you don't." "What do I do?" I asked. "We prepare," she said. "We take you for a full neuropsych evaluation with a clinician who has testified before. We schedule it ourselves, not through him. We get your medical baseline on the record. We update your durable power of attorney and healthcare directive naming someone you trust. We do it before he files anything." "Who would I name?" I asked, the question a hollow I tried not to look into. "Someone who loves you and has no need of your money," she said. I thought of June and her feed store coffee. I thought of Tomas and his steady hands on a skittish horse. I thought of my grandson Jamie, whom I hadn't seen since he was 12 because adults make children walk the distance adults create. He would be 20 now, somewhere I did not know. I could not ask a ghost to sign a form. "Tomas," I said. "Good," she said simply. "We'll draft it." Eric must have sensed the door I was closing because he knocked that night with a gentle rap that reminded me nauseatingly of the boy he had been at 8. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "can we talk without the lawyer?" "We can try," I said. He took a breath. "I know you think I'm here for the wrong reasons. Maybe I didn't call you enough. I own that. But Uncle David didn't leave you a houseplant, Mom. He left you half a county. There are people who will come after it. They will sue you, trick you, wear you down. I don't want that for you." "Who sent Clay?" I asked. "He works with a firm I've invested in," Eric said. "He's aggressive, but he gets results. And he gets a percentage." He stared at me. "Do you want me in your life or not?" he asked, the question bald enough to be brave if it had not been a trap. "I want you in my life," I said. "I don't want you in my pockets." His face closed. "Then you leave me no choice," he said softly. "What choices are those?" He didn't answer. He looked around the kitchen, at the pillbox he'd photographed, at the banker's box now gone. "You're not thinking clearly," he said. "Grief, age, it's a lot. I can carry a lot," I said. He left without slamming the door. That was how I knew I'd hurt him. Ms. Patel moved quickly. By Friday, I had undergone a full cognitive assessment that left me tired and oddly proud, like a report card you didn't know you still cared about. On Monday, we signed the updated healthcare directive and durable power of attorney. Tomas sat across from me at Ms. Patel's conference table, his hat on his knee. "This means I can say no for you if you can't say it yourself," he said slowly. It means you'll say what I would say, I replied. Outside, the wind picked up, a dry, restless sound that rattled the mesquite. The land wanted rain it wouldn't get. Eric filed his petition the next day. I found out when a deputy knocked on my door with a polite face and papers in his hand. Ma'am, he said, you've been served. The petition alleged that I was unable to manage my finances due to progressive cognitive decline, that I had become susceptible to undue influence, and that in my vulnerability I had been taken advantage of by unknown parties, a phrase that managed to smear me while pretending to defend me. Attached was a declaration from a doctor I had never seen, a concerned consultation from an urgent care clinic 2 towns over, dated the week Eric arrived. Patient appears confused about medications, demonstrates impaired recall of recent events, and repeats the same questions, it said. I imagined Eric walking into the clinic with a story and a photograph of my pillbox and felt the kind of rage that settles cold. Miss Patel met me that afternoon. Don't panic, she said. We have your evaluation, we have your updated documents, and we have something else. She slid a small recorder across the table. You're going to ask him to come tomorrow to help you organize your banking. You'll use this. You won't prompt him. You'll let him talk. It's legal? I asked. In this state, if one party to a conversation consents to recording my... Yes, she said. And if he's as confident as he seems, he'll incriminate himself without realizing it. I felt older than my years as I tucked the recorder in my sweater pocket the next day. I made tea. I put the checkbook on the table. I left my purse on the counter, the leather tired and honest. When Eric knocked, I opened the door and smiled like mother ducks do when they know the fox has already stepped into the snare. Let me help, he said, relieved by how easy it seemed. He sat, took out his own pen, and began to talk. He explained how signatory authority worked, how it was standard for a son to be added to accounts for convenience. He said the bank had forms we could fill out tomorrow. He said most judges preferred to see family members already stepping up. He said the words guardianship and conservatorship, not realizing that even saying them was a confession of intent. He suggested that if we moved quickly, we could lock in an option agreement Clay's firm had drafted, just to keep returns on the table, Mom, and that he could sign on my behalf if the judge took too long. On my behalf? I asked mildly. You'd thank me later, he said, and he believed it. When he left, I sat longer than the tea stayed warm. Loving someone is not the same as trusting them, and sometimes the kindest thing a mother can do is refuse to let her child do harm. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. Those days stretched and rattled like a wind-blown gate. Eric didn't call. Instead, Clay called 3 times a day and left voicemails that sounded like weather alerts. There were windows closing. There were opportunities vanishing. There were competitors moving. I let them all vanish. It felt good to let something go that wanted so badly to be caught. The night before the hearing, I drove out to the far west boundary where the land fell into a canyon like a deliberate decision. I parked at the rim and walked down the path David and I had taken as children, our hands sticky with mesquite sap and sugar from pilfered candies. At the bottom, the creek still ran in a thin silver thread, shaded by cottonwoods. I touched the trunk of the oldest tree, its bark furrowed like an old woman's forehead, and I said aloud, "Help me do right." It wasn't a prayer so much as a promise to myself. The courthouse smelled like dust and furniture polish. Miss Patel wore a navy suit and the expression of a woman who enjoys her work. Eric sat with Clay and a second man I didn't know. He didn't look at me when I entered. That hurt more than I wanted it to. The judge was a small woman with a large presence, gray hair cut sharply, eyes that made me sit straighter. Good morning, she said, and it wasn't. Eric's attorney spoke first, presenting the petition, the urgent care declaration, and a list of my concerning behaviors. Failure to return calls promptly, confusion about dates, neglecting maintenance on the south boundary fence, Tomas would laugh at that, and increasing isolation. He asked for temporary conservatorship with Eric as conservator and for an order authorizing immediate control over all financial accounts and property to prevent waste. Ms. Patel stood. Your Honor, my client buried her brother 8 days ago, she said. If she failed to return calls, it was because she was grieving, not incompetent. We have a recent comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation that shows no impairment. We have updated healthcare and financial directives properly executed weeks before this petition, and we have evidence that Mr. Whitman is not a disinterested son swooping in to save his mother. He is a man with business partners and plans. She pressed the recorder's button. Eric's voice filled the courtroom, warm, condescending, calculating. The judge listened without expression. When it ended, the silence was complete. The judge turned to Eric. Do you dispute that this is your voice? He swallowed. No, Your Honor. Do you dispute that you attempted to add yourself to your mother's accounts? I suggested it for convenience, he said, choosing the same word he'd chosen in my kitchen. The judge's mouth edged into something that wasn't a smile. Convenience, she repeated. Whose? She denied the petition. Then she did something Eric had not expected. She referred the matter to the district attorney for review of possible elder exploitation and fraud. Eric's face went slack, then angry, then blank. He stood up too fast and his chair skittered back. Clay put a hand on his arm. The second man whispered something I couldn't hear. Ms. Patel touched my elbow. Breathe, she murmured. We're not done. We were not. I had my own plans to announce. A week later, I invited Eric to the house. He came because he wanted to fix what he had broken, or to see what could still be taken. Maybe both. I set out iced tea and the good glasses David used when he pretended we were civilized. Tomas sat at the table with us because his name was on something now, and because I wanted Eric to see who family could be. I'm forming a stewardship board, I said. As of this morning, Whitmore Range and Water, LLC, holds all deeded property and mineral rights. The board has 3 members. I am one. Tomas is the second. The third is Dr. Ray Benedict, a range ecologist recommended by the Tribal Council. Any sale or transfer requires unanimous consent. This includes severing water rights, permitting wind or solar installations over a certain footprint, and any debt secured by the land. Eric stared as if the language itself were an insult. You can't do that, he said finally. I can, I said. I did. Mom, this is insane, he said, the word ugly because he had used it when he was 14 and wanted to cut his hair to his scalp. You are locking up generational wealth. For what? Birds? Grass? For the children of people whose names you don't know, I said. For water in a year when rain doesn't come. For choice. He laughed harsh. You didn't choose me. I am choosing you now, I said, and he blinked. I am choosing to give you something you didn't ask for, because asking is not something you have practiced. I am giving you a seat on the scholarship committee of the Whitmore Foundation. We will be funding apprenticeships and tuition for kids from the counties this land touches: mechanics, nurses, welders, teachers. You can help choose them. You'll read their essays. You'll see their faces. Maybe you'll remember who you wanted to be when you were 10. He shook his head like a horse bothered by flies. I don't want to hand out pennies, he said. I want to build something. Then build yourself, I said. Because you're broke in a place money can't fix. He stood. I'll appeal, he said, stretching the word until it thinned. You may, I said. In the meantime, stay off my land without permission. That includes the South Access Road and the old line shack. Clay can find the highway on his own. He paused at the door. The light behind him made him look younger. I came back to try, he said, quieter. I really did. So did I said. Every day for 10 years. He left. Tomas blew out a breath. That one is like a colt that doesn't know what a fence is for, he said. Fences aren't just to keep things out, I said. They keep things in that would wander into traffic. 2 months passed. The DA opened an investigation and then closed it quietly after a stern warning and a diversion agreement that required Eric to complete a course on financial exploitation of elders and to have no further contact about my finances. It was a mercy, and I felt how easily mercy can be misread as softness. He did not call. I told myself I was relieved. In September, the first cold wind came, early and insincere. I spent my mornings with Miss Patel and Dr. Benedict, rewriting old leases into new agreements that paid fair and protected more. We created a conservation easement on the canyon that allowed for cattle passage and forbade any road cut across the creek bed. We negotiated with the wind developers and offered them a small footprint on the far north ridge where the antelope didn't graze and the shadow flicker wouldn't make a hawk dizzy. We took the lease payments and put them into the foundation. Money wants to move. You get to decide where. At the feed store, June pinned a flyer to the corkboard. Whitmore Foundation scholarships. Apply now. The first week, 3 kids took applications and didn't bring them back. The second week, 9 did and 5 returned. I read every essay at my kitchen table and cried over each one like a fool. I cried at the grammar and at the grit. I don't need out, one boy wrote in a careful hand. I need a way through. One afternoon, a truck pulled up to the house and a young man got out, tall, awkward with the weight of shoulders that had grown faster than his courage. He took off his hat and held it in both hands. Grandma? He said. Jamie. The name hit my mouth before I meant to say it. I heard about the scholarships, he said near the door as if he might need to run. I figured I should come ask in person. Do you need money? I asked. It was not what I meant to ask, but it was how people like us asked the same question. How are you? He smiled, a brief flash that made him 12 again. Who doesn't? He sat at my table and ate 2 bowls of stew in a way that told a story of recent lean times. He told me he'd left his father's house at 19 when Eric had tried to use him as a courier for some business he didn't want to describe. He'd been working as a mechanic, good with his hands, saving what he could. He wanted to enroll at the community college for a welding certification. It's honest, he said. It's work you can look at when you're done and say, I made that hold. I like things that hold, I said. He looked around the kitchen like a boy looks at a childhood church. Dad told me not to come, he said, not quite apologizing for disobeying. He said you were busy. I am, I said. I'm busy making it so boys like you don't have to ask permission to become men. We filled out the scholarship form together. I read his essay aloud. I don't want to leave this county, he had written. I want to make it better and make a living while I'm at it. I can do that with a torch and a steady hand. I know a man who will hire you the day you finish, I said. June's cousin runs a shop in town. He's fair. He grinned. I'll take fair. When he left, I stood on the porch long after the dust settled, the sun lowering itself toward the ridge like an old dog finding a place to sleep. I had thought my son showing up after a decade would be the surprise of the year. I was wrong. It was my grandson's face at my table. It was humility coming back into my house, dressed as he said. Hope. Late October brought a storm we needed, and the kind of trouble I had learned to expect. I was in the pantry making a list of what I needed for winter when I heard the crunch of multiple tires on gravel. I wiped my hands and stepped onto the porch. 3 black SUVs parked like mall security at a rodeo. Clay got out of the first, flanked by 2 men whose shirts pulled too tight over their stomachs. Eric stepped out of the second. I had not seen him since the hearing. He looked thinner, trimmed down by anger, or maybe by consequence. He took off his sunglasses, and I saw his eyes were red the way a tired man's eyes redden when a dam he built loses a section. "Afternoon," I said. "You boys lost?" Clay spoke first. "We're here to serve you with notice," he said. "We represent Red Star Renewables. Under state law, we're entitled to survey for wind resources on private land within designated corridors. We've already secured consent from adjacent owners. You'll be compensated." He handed me a packet heavy with paper and light with truth. Ms. Patel had taught me to read the first paragraph and the last signature before I let a heartbeat rise. The notice asserted a right that didn't exist and named a corridor that had been removed from state maps 5 years ago. It was a bluff, folded and ironed. "Who taught you to read?" I asked Clay politely. "Because they should ask for their money back." Eric shifted. Embarrassed or angry, I couldn't tell. "Mom, please," he said. "Just hear them out. I've heard enough men out to know that when one uses the word just, he's already not listening." Clay smiled, as showing rows of white that did the work his arguments couldn't. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm trying to make this pleasant." "I don't need pleasant," I said. "I need legal. This notice doesn't match the law or the land. You'll leave now." He took a step closer. The 2 men behind him adjusted in unison, like furniture being moved. Eric looked from face to face. "Mom," he tried again, "you're making this harder than it needs to be." I stepped back inside and returned with my phone, already dialing. "Sheriff," I said when he answered. "We have uninvited guests refusing to leave. They're attempting to access private property without a lawful right." Clay's smile thinned. "No need for that," he said. "Oh, I think there is," I said. "A woman my age shouldn't have this kind of stress. Isn't that what you told me?" The sheriff arrived faster than I expected, a courtesy that made me consider baking his wife a pie. He read the notice, looked at Clay, and said, "Pack it up, gentlemen." They did, sullen as teenagers. Eric stood by his SUV, hands in his pockets, watching me. When the last car taillights disappeared, he still stood there. "I wanted to build something here," he said. "I wanted to do it with you." "You wanted to do it to me," I said. He flinched. "What can I say that changes this?" "What would you have believed if I'd said it to you 10 years ago?" I asked. He looked at the ground, because the ground below a man is still honest even when he isn't. "Nothing," he said. "Then there's your answer." He left. I went inside and leaned against the counter until my back stopped hurting. Fear wears the same boots as courage. The difference is whether you lace them yourself. Winter came, not with snow, but with that kind of flat, bright cold that makes distant things seem near. The scholarship committee met at my kitchen table because conference rooms make people say things they don't mean. We chose 12 students, and I cried again, and nobody made fun of me because women my age are finally allowed to. Jamie called to say he'd been accepted into the welding program and that he was working odd jobs to keep gas in his truck. "I can pick up shifts at the shop on weekends," he said. "I'll make it work." "You'll do more than that," I said. "You'll make it hold." In January, Ms. Patel called. "Eric filed again," she said. "Not for you, for temporary restraining order against you disposing of assets." "He doesn't learn," I said sadly. "He learns," she said, "just not what you're teaching." In court, the judge wore the same precise haircut, the same direct eyes. "Mr. Whitman," she said, If you appear in my courtroom again with a petition so devoid of merit, I will sanction you personally. She turned to me. Ms. Whitman, I can't order family to behave. I can only order what the law allows. But I want you to know I see what you're doing here. Thank you, I said, and it felt like being seen at the exact age you are and not the one people project onto you. After that, he stopped using the courts. He went to the press. An article appeared online, a photograph of the house at sunset stolen from my niece's old Instagram post. The headline accused me of locking up resources and depriving the county of tax revenue. The comments were the usual mix of boredom and cruelty. Old lady should move aside, one declared. Another said worse. I closed the laptop and sat still. A minute later, June called. Don't read the comments, she ordered. Come down for coffee. When I walked into the feed store, the room went quiet the way rooms do when people are deciding what to do with their shame. June poured coffee and slid a cinnamon roll toward me. On the house, she said, and on the record, I support the hell out of what you're doing. That night I wrote a letter to the editor. I didn't defend myself. I told the story of the windmill and my father's pennies. I wrote about water as currency and cattle as a promise. I wrote about scholarships and the boy who wanted a way through. The paper printed it, and the next morning I found a note tucked into my screen door. It read simply, "Thank you for keeping the canyon ours." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Spring brought green in a way that felt like a dare. The calves came easy. The tanks filled without prayer. For a week, I let myself believe the year would be simple. Then the wind changed. It started as a smoke ribbon on the southern horizon. Thin at first, barely worth remarking on. By afternoon, it was a fist. The radio crackled with county warnings. A wildfire had jumped the river 20 miles south, running on cheatgrass and wind. They named it like a child, and then they started calling for volunteers. I packed the truck with coolers of water, sacks of baling twine, shovels, towels. Tomas met me at the gate with 2 hands from the neighboring outfit. "We'll cut a break along the old 2-track, he said. "If it turns north, we keep it from the canyon." At the staging area, men and women stood in a semicircle around the incident captain, faces smeared with ash, eyes bright and hollow. A young firefighter handed out paper masks that wouldn't stop smoke, but would give our mouths something to believe in. "Stay behind the line," the captain said. "If we call a retreat, you run. No hero moves." We cut fire breaks with blades, with shovels, with desperation. Sparks leaped the lines like goats. The heat had a sound. It roared and hissed and clicked as juniper popped like knuckles. I tasted metal. The world was orange and then black. Near dusk, a white pickup pulled in where it had no business. Clay stepped out. Clean shirt, clean boots, a clipboard in hand. Behind him, a tanker truck with a corporate logo nosed forward like a pig at a trough. Eric was with him, bandana at his neck like a costume. "What in God's name are you doing here?" I shouted over the wind. Clay lifted the clipboard. "Emergency water procurement," he said. "The county can compensate private landowners for pond water. We're consolidating supply for aerial drops. Sign here." He tapped the signature line and slid a second sheet toward me. "This authorizes us to coordinate directly with your water rights downstream in case we need to draw." I read the fine print because I always do. The first sheet was real. The second transferred short-term control of my water to an intermediary, his firm, for the duration of the emergency, renewable at their discretion. In a drought year, that paper could pry the cap off every tank I owned. Eric touched my arm. "Mom, this is for the fire," he said, earnest in a way that would have fooled anyone who didn't raise him. "We need to move." I took the first sheet. I signed it. I handed back the second. You can draw from the West Ponds with county oversight, I said. You will not touch downstream rights. Clay's smile faltered. We don't have time to argue, he said. Then stop arguing, I said. Start helping. We fought until the stars were smudges. The fire hit our brake and leaned against it like an old drunk. Pressing, failing, trying again. At 2 a.m, the wind fell. The flames laid down. We slept where we stood. By morning, the worst had passed for us. South of the river, they were still losing cottonwoods like teeth. I drove the fence lines with Tomas, checking for burns. At the third tank, we found the hose still warm and the pump gauge showing draw. They pulled more than from the West Ponds, Tomas said quietly. At the house, Miss Patel sat at the table with coffee already poured. Clay filed an emergency notice at 3 a.m., she said without greeting. He tried to register a temporary transfer of your downstream rights to his firm, backdated to yesterday. The county clerk called me. He thought we'd be too tired to read, I said. He wasn't wrong. We filed our own notice. We attached photographs, timestamps, GPS coordinates. The county voided the transfer and issued a warning to Red Star Renewables. The sheriff paid Clay a visit. He wasn't arrested. I wasn't satisfied. But the fire was out, the creek still ran, and you take your victories in the size they come. In the weeks after, the county held a public forum to discuss lessons learned. I sat in a metal folding chair under fluorescent lights that hummed with a sound like old bees. Farmers, ranchers, teachers, a nurse with ash still in her cuticles. Everyone took a turn at the microphone. Some wanted more bulldozers. Some wanted better radios. I wanted to talk about water. When my turn came, I walked to the mic and kept my hands at my sides, where everyone could see they weren't shaking. I'm Eleanor Whitman, I said. My brother and father taught me to treat water like a neighbor, with respect, with boundaries, with reciprocity. During the fire, a company tried to use an emergency to pry open a right they couldn't purchase in broad daylight. I won't pretend I'm not angry. But I'll tell you what we did instead of selling. We wrote a conservation plan with our tribal partners. We funded a student who wants to become a hydrologist, and we posted the pump draws from every tank during the fire on the foundation website so the public can see when and how we used what we all share. A man in the back muttered about rich ladies and their pet projects. I let him. The incident captain stood and said simply, Ms. Whitman's water kept a flank from jumping. That's a fact. The room shifted a degree toward me. June started clapping. It sounded like rain beginning. In May, when the mesquite leafed out like a revelation, trouble returned in a pinstripe suit. Ms. Patel called, Eric's applied for a loan in Austin using a second deed of trust on your house. You know the rest. The forged signature, the notary with the chicken coop memory, the warrant, the call from jail. I paid for the lawyer. He confessed and took probation and community service in the welding shop. Mercy can feel like a knife you hand to a person and pray they learn to cut bread instead of throats. Summer settled itself like a tired animal. Jamie came by most Sundays. We built a rack for fence posts, and he showed me a weld that looked like a line of coins. Stacked dimes, he said proudly. That's what they call a good bead. Looks like a promise kept, I said. July was for storms that teased, and for the first of the Foundation's ranch internships. 3 students rotated through for 2 weeks each, learning how to string wire, how to read grass, how to check a cow without getting your ribs stepped on. Dr. Benedict took them to the canyon and knelt to show them crusts in the soil that break if you breathe wrong. This is a world you don't see until you love it, she said. One boy cried and didn't know why. Then came August and the call from the bank in Austin, the arrest you already know, the plea, the hours at the shop. In between court dates and shop shifts, Eric started sending me texts he didn't expect me to answer. How many scholarships this year? Do you still keep the old brand book? What did Dad use to keep the compressor from kicking? I answered 2 out of 3. You have to leave a man a question he can find on his own. In September, we held the Foundation's first ceremony at the community college. 12 students in clean shirts stood in a line, each holding a check, all of them lit from inside. Jamie wore Anna's lipstick on his cheek. Mara came from Red Mesa and called me sister. The sheriff shook my hand and said, "Thank you for calling me when you did." Dr. Benedict made grown men cry talking about grass. Eric stood at the back and didn't come forward. He stacked chairs when it was over. That was enough for that day. You might think that's where the story ends, with balance achieved and enemies chastened. Stories about land don't end. They lengthen. October brought a developer's slick new approach. A zoning proposal wrapped in promises of county revenue and temporary worker housing for a solar farm just east of the canyon. The temporary housing would have become permanent in 5 years and a town 10 years after that. Ms. Patel and I read the proposal line by line. Buried in an appendix was a cooperative agreement with Red Star Renewables. Clay had changed his logo, not his appetite. At the county commission hearing, the room was packed. Teachers who wanted tax revenue, ranchers who wanted quiet, a pastor who wanted the lights to dim on Sundays. I spoke last. I described the Canyon Trust. The scholarship students now apprenticing at clinics and shops. The way the creek runs clear when no one punches a road through its bed. I ended with a simple sentence. We are not poor in ways that money fixes. The commission voted 3-2 to table the proposal indefinitely. Clay shook hands anyway, smiling like a man who can't tell the difference between a pause and a no. He brushed past me at the door. You won't live forever, he murmured. Neither will you, I said, but this might. I gestured toward the canyon in my head, the trust in my purse, the scholarship in my breast pocket. Winter again, bright and flat. Frost rimmed the tank edges. The windmills turned like patient saints. Eric showed up less like weather and more like a man learning what a schedule is. He worked his hours at the shop and then a few beyond. Sometimes he came by to ask after a tool or to drop off a sack of feed with a receipt that said paid by Eric Whitman. He never stayed long. He never stayed too short. He was learning the length of things. One afternoon I found him in the barn, oil to his elbows, swearing softly at the compressor. He looked up, and for a moment he was the boy who had gripped my hair in his sleep. It's stuck, he said, sheepish. I can't get the pressure right. Show me, I said, and we bent over the machine together. I wiped my hands on a rag and told him how to seat the gasket, how to listen for the change in the hum. He did it. The compressor sighed into obedience. He looked at me and smiled small. Thanks, he said. Don't thank me, I said. Help me load fence posts. He did. We worked in a rhythm that felt like a language we had once known and forgotten. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't map the future. We carried what was in front of us. Sometimes that's the only way a fence line gets finished before dark. At dusk, we stood by the gate and looked at what we'd done. A straight run from cottonwood to corner, wire singing tight, posts set true. The wind picked up and laid the grass down in one smooth breath. It's beautiful, he said, surprised. It's enough, I said. A month later, Jamie brought Anna by to show me the ring he'd bought her with money from overtime hours at the shop. It wasn't big. It was clean and honest. We'll get married under the cottonwood, he said, and I said, we'll bring chairs, not expectations. On the morning they chose, the sky was so blue, it looked like a story someone told. We strung lights from the porch to the elm. Mara stood with her hands over their hands and spoke words that fit the wind. Eric stood 2 people down from me. When the vows were done, he hugged his son for so long that people started laughing the way people do when tears need a polite place to go. Later, when the brisket was down to blackened ends and the cake had a corner missing because a toddler couldn't wait, Eric came to stand beside me. "I don't deserve this," he said. "Deserving doesn't enter into a lot of things that save us," I said. "You show up. You lift what's in front of you. You put back what you can." He nodded. "I won't ask about the LLC," he added after a moment. "Rye. Or the trust. Or the board." "You're learning," I said. He looked out toward the canyon, though you can't see it from the yard. "I thought land made a man," he said. "Turns out men make land or ruin it." "Some of us are busy mending," I said. "There are still nights when I wake and listen for footsteps that won't come. My father's, my brother's, my husband's. On those nights, I make tea and sit on the porch and let the dark tell me what it knows. It says, 'You did not go quietly.' It says not all legacies are for sale. It says mercy is not weakness and boundaries are not cruelty. It says you were trusted. You are still." When the morning comes, I lace my boots, old leather creaking, and step out into the day. The fence needs walking. The water needs measuring. The scholarship letters need signing. The world needs the kind of revenge that looks like care. And somewhere, just beyond the ridge, a windmill turns and the tank fills and the cows drink and the grass grows because no one sold the water out from under it. My brother left me wealth. My son tried to take it. What came of both is this: a house with a porch, a trust that binds rather than breaks, a canyon held by 2 hands, a boy with a torch who knows how to make metal obey, and a man learning how to stand without leaning on a lie. That's my ending. Or rather, that's where I stop talking so I can get back to work.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.